In 2007, the Barna Group teamed up with Pew Research to conduct a joint study among non-Christian people. They were wanting to understand how the average non-Christian perceives the Christians they know. And they interviewed over 10,000 people asking one simple question: what word best describes the Christians you know? The number one response they received, far above every other response, the single word most often used to describe the Christians these people had known, was the term judgmental. Now, this study was conducted almost 15 years ago today, so you might consider it old research. But the honest question I have is, how much better do you think we would fare today if the same study were conducted in our culture? And while these things like terms judgmental or hypocritical, all these fill in the blank as to what you think people would respond, while these things have unfortunately been broadly attributed to people in the church, and we might say kind of unfairly, most of the Christians I know and the ones you know probably do not fit that bill or that description or that stereotype. If we're really honest, at some point or in some specific group within the church, we can kind of go, yeah, I see that too. Yeah, I get why you would say that about Christians. And if we dug a little bit deeper and we were even more honest, if we were truly open, we know that we, you and me both, as individuals, have at certain points been a part of the problem ourselves. But Jesus is very clear that this shouldn't be so for his disciples. We should not be known by these negative terms and stereotypes, but be living a way of life that models something differently. Matthew chapter 7, verse 1 through 12, Jesus teaches about how we judge other people, and he goes on to give us some teaching on prayer and loving others. It's really important, but I want to spend simply a couple minutes talking about Jesus' classic here. Judge not, lest ye be judged. And the Greek word here that's used to translate into the word judge is the Greek word krino. Now, krino is a very simple word that means very simply to decide something, or you might say in our context to make a judgment about something. It's very in an objective way, very objective here. We're talking about like, hey, I got this or that. Which do I choose? Which do I decide? I make a decision about something, right? It's like Coke or Pepsi. Where do I stand? And there's nothing wrong with this, right? Where how do we get from like making a simple decision in this word to the judgment that Jesus is talking about? We do it all the time. We make judgments about things on a daily basis. What shirt am I going to wear? Where do I want to go for lunch, right? I'm actively making a decision. I'm making a judgment in this moment. Like if I were to put to you the decision, Nito burrito or Chipotle, which is better? We would all say together, Chipotle. Yes, that's correct. Chipotle is the correct answer. We're making judgments about things, sometimes very small or insignificant things, but simply making decisions. This is exactly what this word is speaking to. And making judgments about things isn't a bad thing, naturally. Making decisions between this or that, it's very neutral. But even making judgments about things that are important, about ideologies or belief systems, or discerning between what is right and what is wrong, there's nothing inherently evil there either, right? Good judgment is a virtue. It's important to be able to discern between ideologies and belief systems and lifestyle choices so that we can understand right and wrong. So, Jesus, what are you talking about? We shouldn't be judging in any way. Well, let's break it down very simply. Jesus does believe that we need discernment, and we have to decide and discern between ideologies and what is right and what is wrong. But here's what Jesus is speaking to. The reality that our judgment, specifically when it comes to judgment between the lifestyle or behavior or character of another person, our judgment rarely lives in the objective state. Focus purely on like an ideological point of view, like I'm talking specifically about your behavior, but I'm not getting personal with it. Our judgment rarely lives only there with those little things, those ideas, those elements, those things that aren't attached to the person being the subject of our focus and our judgment. Here's what naturally happens. Our minds very quickly start to cast judgments not only on an idea or a behavior, but we quickly begin to make assumptions about the person whose behaviors or ideas are in question. And we sit there and we look at other people and we watch their behavior and we observe their appearance. What are they wearing? How are they presenting themselves? And we start to assume very quickly, many of us, that we have them all figured out, right? like I've got your number, I've figured you out, I know what kind of person you are. And we already begin to peg people and put them into certain groups and identities and sometimes stereotypes. We categorize people and cast identity upon them. We give them, from our mind's eye, the identity that we see in them. And before long, something's happened. We've dehumanized this person and cast judgment, this kind of judgment, cast judgment upon them. And then it often gets worse from there. It doesn't just start or stay there. It often gets much worse, because what often happens to many of us with our righteous characteristics in our minds, we not only assume that we have that other person or that group of people completely figured out, like I figured out who you are, I know exactly what kind of people you are, but we also believe that Jesus agrees with the judgment we've made. We almost feel absolved from our judgment because we might say, well, Jesus would think so too if he saw what you were doing. And very quickly, our judgments have become much more than objective discernment, and it turns to deep, personal, dehumanizing condemnation of another person or a group of people. And Jesus isn't just talking about how we see non-Christian people or how we see the world. The term he uses is brother and sister. Even the people within our own church community that should be our brothers and our sisters, our family, we cast these same judgments. We bring the same condemnation upon our very brothers and sisters. And if we were all very honest, you and me, we know that we're each a part of this in some way. If we're really honest, even if there are things you don't say or publicly share, you know you do that in your mind too, just as I do. So what do we do about it? Jesus identifies this issue, and he's not saying, hey, some of you are doing this. He's like, this is what we do, and we got to figure this out. I think there are a couple things Jesus would have us keep in the front of our minds as we approach one another, as we want to have those tough conversations, because they do need to happen sometimes. The goal of community is that we can wrestle through things together. We can grow together. We can challenge one another toward growth in the Spirit. This is what Jesus is calling us to. And so there are a few things I think are important for us. I think Jesus highlights for us as we approach one another, carefully and gently approach these difficult conversations. The first thing I think Jesus is showing us is that as we approach one another, we need to recognize our own massive shortcomings. Read with me in verse 3. Why do you look at the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Now, Jesus talks about specks and logs here, and we often think like, oh, it's a little bit like a grain of salt. And then there's like, oh, it's kind of a bigger splinter. No, Jesus is talking about a log. You're supposed to laugh a little bit here. He's using hyperbole. He's talking like, you have a whole tree coming out of your face, dude. When you look at somebody's speck that's in their eye, well, you can't see them clearly because you got this giant log, this tree stump, like coming out of your face. He's using hyperbole to really communicate a strong point. Jesus isn't saying that we should just ignore the different areas of growth or avoid tough conversations with one another about things that are important, about things that we need to remove and to heal and to clear up. We should be holding each other accountable and growing together. But what he is saying is that in every conversation, we should approach the other person assuming I actually have it far worse than they do. Like if I see a speck in somebody else's eye, I can recognize I have a tree limb coming out of my face. This is what Jesus is communicating to us, that this should be our posture and our approach when we come to one another. He's saying that we have to be honest and open. And if we were truly open and honest with ourselves in every interaction, in every judgment, owning that I probably have so much wrong in my own life that I'm probably blind to, this will do something. This will cultivate humility within me. And it makes it possible, hopefully, to actually have fruitful, helpful interactions in which we genuinely help one another grow rather than cast judgment or dehumanize another person. Jesus is calling all of us to live our lives every day as people who recognize our own massive shortcomings, the log coming out of my eye as we interact with other people. Jesus is saying that we need to recognize, as we approach each other, recognize our own massive shortcomings because it'll bring relational health and conversation. And the second thing he's calling us to, as we approach one another, is to approach tough conversations the right way. So I come in humility, but then my approach that I come with needs to be specific. It needs to be the right way. Jesus goes on after talking about specks and logs, and he gives a little brief teaching on pearls and swine. And I don't know if you read this and you were like, what does that have to do with what we just read, Jesus? Why are these things grouped together? Here's verse 6. Do not give what is holy to dogs, and do not throw your pearls before pigs, or they will trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces. You might be confused on what's going on here. Is Jesus calling people dogs and pigs? I don't think that's what Jesus is doing. He's simply noting a natural reality that pigs and dogs don't see things the same way we do, right? I don't know if you're a dog owner. If you have a dog, you know that there's one thing in the entire world that will boost your dog's mood more than anything. If you give them this one thing, they will lose their minds and be immediately happy. A treat. If you give a dog a treat, their heart rate increases, they're just spike. They're so excited to receive a treat. Now, on the opposite side of the spectrum, what's something they probably could not care less about if you gave it to them? Probably pearls is pretty high on the list, right? They're like, I don't care. I can't use this. What am I supposed to do with a pearl? I would prefer a treat, please. And the same is true for pigs, right? Like, what am I going to do with pearls? These are useless to me. But on the opposite side of the spectrum, right? Like, for us, we cast value on things differently. Like, we're like, keep your Rice Krispies, man. I'll take a pearl. Give me the diamonds. I'm in for that. And I don't think Jesus is trying to say that certain people are dogs and certain people are pigs and you shouldn't waste your time. What he's simply trying to do is help us recognize something, that we don't all connect to things the same way. So how does this relate to what we're talking about? It relates like this. When it comes to helping a brother or a sister with the speck in their eye, if I just barge in on their lives with a holy fire, intended to straighten them out, right? Like I'm going to show them what's really wrong in their life, and this is the approach I'm taking. Two problematic things are happening. One, that approach is failing to respect them as a person who's made in the image of God, who deserves far more dignity than that. And something else is going to happen. That approach might also simply provoke the opposite response you're looking for. They'll probably turn on you and run you out of their house because they're like, why'd you come in like that? I don't want you in my house anymore, right? This is what Jesus is saying. Like, they might trample you and maul you like pigs, right? What is Jesus saying here clearly? A couple things. First, he's saying that we all need to recognize this is true, that we don't all value things the same way. The approach that works for me probably doesn't work for you, and so we can't assume that the approach that I have in my mind is exactly what's best for having a conversation with this person. We don't all value things the same way. The approach that works best for you probably doesn't work best for them. And so the way we approach one another matters deeply. This is what I believe is the code, the understanding of the pearls and the swine. Why does this matter? Why is this important? Because while right and wrong do exist, and hard conversations do sometimes need to be had, for sure, Jesus' primary heart is for us to have healthy, honoring, humble relationships with one another, even in confrontation. Because in Jesus' way, it is the love we have for one another that draws us together as a church, and it's the love Christians have for one another that marks us out to the world as disciples of the way of Jesus.